I think that was the nicest introduction I've ever had. My only regret is that my mother wasn't actually here to hear it. So if there's some way we can get a clip of that to send to her, I won't have to remember another Mother's Day for like 10 years. I want to thank the graduating class first and foremost for inviting me. It is such a privilege to be here. I want to thank Dr. Cosgrove, Dr. Young, Dr. Stoller. And I want to start off by saying congratulations, you made it. This is the moment if you're... This is the moment you've pictured during your undergraduate years or shortly thereafter, or if you're anything like me, since you were in 5th grade, which didn't make me the coolest kid in 5th grade, by the way. You've worked incredibly hard. You've become experts on topics through research or your medical school work you never envisioned before starting, and forged friendships, some of which will be lifelong, that you'll always value. All of your planning has paid off. As you are graduated this weekend and head off to the great diaspora of your internships, I'd like to leave you with 3 nuggets of advice today, things that didn't fit into my vision of what would happen after medical school, that, had I heard these 3 nuggets, might have explained how it veered from all my planning. At the end of my talk, you can decide whether I've handed you nuggets of gold or chicken nuggets. These nuggets are the following. First, follow your emotions. You'll work out the logic behind your decision at some point in the future. Second, please always appreciate how very privileged we are to be included in the intimacy of our patients' lives. And third, nurture those friendships, those relationships you've made already and that you will make. You'll need them one day. I hope you'll allow me the vanity of telling you a story to show what I mean. And this is a story I have written about because it's something I still think about to this day. I came out of medical school in 1996 determined to be a cardiologist. I know that having med school here at Cleveland Clinic, none of you has thought about cardiology at all. I had just completed my master's degree with a focus on cardiovascular pharmacoepidemiology, and if you're wondering, that isn't a phrase you offer up during a first date, unless you want to ensure you're home in time to curl up with a bag of Pepperidge Farm Milano cookies as you watch a rebroadcast of the movie Pretty in Pink. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that movie. I chose my residency in internal medicine, as you heard, at Mass General, in part because it would set me up well for a cardiology fellowship. During orientation, when I started my internship, I'd learned that I'd be in the medical intensive care unit for my first rotation. This was an area that the older residents referred to as the Death Star somewhat derisively, so it didn't exactly increase my enthusiasm for being there. I had never spent time in an intensive care unit as a medical student, so this would be unfamiliar terrain. And I'd be on call the first night. Now I see a couple of you shifting in your seats as you realize this will be you in 6 weeks. It's hard to summarize that mixture of excitement and extreme terror that I felt that very first day of being a doctor. I was paired with a second-year resident, Dave, who quickly took on the role of Master Jedi to my young Padawan, having quickly sized me up and correctly coming to the conclusion he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. He was right. Dave did all the work of writing notes, making decisions about patients, and placing invasive lines, while I ran errands for him and was thrilled when I could successfully locate an X-ray in the catacombs of the radiology department. As night fell, the other interns and residents signed out to us and took their leave. This was a scene straight out of one of those World War II movies in which the company is forced to abandon the 2 guys whose legs were shot up, leaving them with a certain amount of ammunition to fend off the advancing Germans. They always tell those guys goodbye and promise to come back to retrieve them in the morning if they survive the night, which everyone knows is highly unlikely. One of the people we cared for that night had come to the intensive care unit late in the afternoon. She was a pediatrician in her early 40s from a nearby hospital, who had widely metastatic ovarian cancer and whose lungs were filling with fluid. Initially, she was to be intubated and placed on a respirator, but she changed her mind, deciding instead to live her last hours breathing air on her own, unassisted. Her appearance in our unit had consumed our team's emotions that day, particularly when her son and daughter, ages 10 and 8, came in to say goodbye to her in the evening. We all knew this would be the last time they would see her. Each of us in turn, doctors and nurses, sought refuge off the main floor to check that hitch in our breathing or to cry outright privately. Her husband escorted their children away and returned a couple of hours later with her best friend, now carrying a CVS bag. I glanced in her room and saw her husband standing, hunched over her bed, holding a clipboard as she wrote something. I went back to our conference room. "Hey, Dave, what's going on in there?" I asked, gesturing to her room. By this point of the day, I had proven myself so utterly helpless, I no longer even worried about asking Dave questions that bordered on the completely moronic. If I had even time to go to the bathroom, I probably would have needed his help with that. I will always be thankful that he never judged me and answered without prejudice. "She's writing out cards," he said. "Oh, 3x5 cards?" I asked. I had a pocket full of them that I used to keep notes on each patient. "No," he shook his head. "Birthday cards, holiday cards, those types." She was writing out cards to her children for every occasion she could imagine. Cards for Valentine's Day, cards for bar and bat mitzvahs, cards for graduations, maybe even a med school graduation, cards for the next 10, 20 years for her son and daughter, cards so she could be a part of their lives, cards because she was so proud of them, cards so they would never forget her. As I remained up all night, caring for others, I'd glance in her room and see her husband or her friend holding up the clipboard as she wrote another card. I can tell you, over the past 19 years, I've often wondered if I would do the same for my children, now that I have them, or how I would deal with this bundle of cards from another world if I were her husband. I also think of her son and daughter. Did they look forward to getting these cards throughout the years, or did they dread them? Maybe her uncertain handwriting during her final hours reminded her kids of the time when she was sick, so they rejected those cards for earlier, happier memories. As the sun rose over the Charles River, Dave called me over to a sink in the intensive care unit that had one of those boiling water faucets, the ones that you can use so you can make a quick cup of tea or instant coffee, if you can remember back to when there was still instant coffee. He placed a couple of washcloths under it and then wrung them out, handing me one and placing one over his own face, barbershop style. I did the same. To this day, I've never felt something as good as that washcloth after my first night on call. One of the ICU nurses came over to us soon after and told us that our patient had just passed away. She lived a decade or two in her last night on this earth, and in so doing fulfilled her responsibility as a parent, successfully seeing her children to their adulthood. Over the next year or two, I tried to convince myself that I still wanted to be a cardiologist, but my heart really wasn't in it anymore. And I can still provide perfectly rational reasons for my career choice of becoming an oncologist, including the fascinating pathobiology of the diseases, the opportunities for translational research, particularly in this genomic era in which we live, or the opportunities to conduct clinical trials of novel chemotherapeutics in the hope of making a difference in my patients' lives. But really, it's to have even a glancing connection to people who face these terrible diseases with dignity, and in so doing, give value to the lives of everyone around them. 5 years passed. I did go into a hematology-oncology fellowship, as you've heard, and I entered my final year of my hem-onc fellowship. One day my pager went off, showing an unfamiliar number. I returned the page and heard Dave's voice on the other end of the line, sounding shaky, without that familiar confidence I'd come to rely on during my internship year. He had just completed his pulmonary and critical care fellowship. He was now staff and was calling me from a hospital room where he had just been diagnosed with lymphoma. This time, he was asking me for help. I made some phone calls to get him an appointment with the right people and saw him as he underwent his cycles of chemotherapy. He's now cured, by the way, and is a nationally prominent medical educator. So you've accomplished something else. You managed to stay awake during my whole story. I'd like to return to those 3 nuggets of advice I started with. The first, follow your emotions. You'll work out the logic behind your decision at some point in the future. The second, appreciate how very privileged we are to be included in the intimacy of our patients' lives. And finally, nurture your friendships, your relationships. You'll need them one day. Thanks so much for listening to me, and once again, congratulations, class of 2015.